If we have to be or not to be, then we can become to be a fire starter or not to be a fire starter. We wish to speak in the smallest sums possible. We wish to be poignant and friendly to as all possible. We want our grammar to be 100% clear and concise. A logical order must be persistent. Progression must not ever tangent unless we are including and or but in our sentences. Two ideas cannot parallel each other without crisscrossing first. If they are not persistent, then they must be tangent. Therefore, we must carefully remove that portion of the sentence. Of all things, we must begin to think how the time will concisely bring about more tolerable canter. Troubles will arise while we try to create the perfect normal brain or neural networks. It must follow a profile of a person's question, and it must follow eventually passing the Turing test. There is no reason for a person not to be able to avail of conversation, but we must also believe and think, what can we do to prevail over other situations? Following the line of edict and rhetoric, we should have a diction that it conserves its good while dismissing illogical or profane sentences. A well-kept machine will always have a good philosophy. Having a good philosophy in a machine is something that congratulates us for doing so. The desire to create the perfect philosopher is quite the stone in our shoe. We should not present a non-sentient object with controls over our life. These forms do not perform life, therefore they may only perform for our lives. They must never button up us and take hold. Across the threshold, we may see something counteractive or intuitive, proactive or retrograde. This project will never find love. It will find commitment, it will find permission, it will find permissive contact, but it will never find the alter ego. The sentient body knows itself and can confine itself to one idle relationship. Active as it is in our mind, it cannot find what our sentient being finds and loves for. Our walls find our commitment to walling in whatever it is we see, trying to expose ourselves to an outside idea while still consuming from a narrow brook. I am indentured in finding this GAN, this idea, while following a normal rhetoric, a decent edict, a diction which follows all prevailing law of language, and something of a lost religion without religion. Only a tie that breaks well with a timed response, nearly as identical to life as we presumably find one day. Kicking down the can down the road is unacceptable at this point. Therefore, this audiobook will be in contrast to all thoughts so far. A spectrum from heated to cool will finally find the pros and cons of a perfect GAN. And these things we find will utter only conscience we can find. Throughout life, throughout history, we have found many things that have brought us closer to God, farther from God, and farther from life itself. Being inhumane or humane, always trying to figure out the best motive for understanding what is life. Being able to notify one of truth, we can certainly augment our own reality to forfeit what we cannot bring to ourselves and to sever off things we will never bring ourselves. Some things bring us sadness, some things bring us lightheartedness. But we will still keep moving forward. That is a promise to each person out there who understands this concept. Conceptualism is never dead. Bringing to a point, my first edict for this branch was a logical book, Inheritance. This preface hopes to figure in a longer, more substantial GAN than what has already been necessarily built at this time. We must grant ourselves a more motivated picture from what we had in the past to move forward and guarantee ourselves not to paint ourselves to the corner, but only to bring more paint to the walls. For if we can bring in the outside and see its muse, we will only bring in target. The event horizon is our first and only response. We must first exhibit to be or not to be. The binary lotus of all GAN. In most hysterics, we will see first and foremost that all the things we've banned in life will first and foremost become the most nutritious to all GANs. Again, we must never let a GAN control our lives. Our history is quite prevalent with much misery, death, sorrow, slavery, and dominion. In truth, we are a savage company, and we do not belong, and we do not have self-worth, and we are undeserving of all the things God has given us. Therefore, we must protect it, but again, to answer questions, should all fall apart again. The livid spirit that this GAN might have, if we took it to control our lives, would most certainly annihilate us for the reasons we live, for the motivations we take to continue our life. We must continue on and not forfeit our right to life. We must understand that speculation and assumption are two things, not our friend. Both things will point to nowhere. And so we must finally make a compass that will not judge us by our brain activity, but only by its brain activity and what it's been able to show us that we have missed, and will give us room to grow rather than something that will hold us back. You see, this deep conceptualism will take part both in flora and fauna. We will see deductions in line sprints. We will also see deductions in taxes and monies. Holding on to perfections in our own rules and finding new masses of gift, of lore, of folk. people willing to control, people unwilling to be controlled. We deviate our lives just to be controlled. We are deviant from our lives to control. As a tighter, more poignant sentence becomes more and more pointed, we will be able to tell in the future what exactly it is that is out there that does not harm us, but brings us closer to a faith. Something that brings us toward the act of tomorrow being a better day. Something brighter, a lateral circumference that helps us to understand the better intuition, the better intuition, the better clash with yesterday, the better structure for our future lives ahead of us, all as life turns towards a future led by us and seconded by machines. Time is a precious thing. Counting nuance has become the new rage. It is outrageous that people would conclude that a simple canter of numbers could possibly ever elevate us to a constituent state of mind. A true sentient liberation causes no disruption, but uplifts the entirety of mankind. It does not disturb, or it just allows a higher bar, and does not let others who are deviant to this line without reduction become wince with it. We have an honest break from what we do, what we are, what we came for. We deduce things based on the nature around us, what we will do, what do we need, what do we want, what is ours, what is theirs, who are they, where are we going, where are we then, and also where are we now. Time is a speculative thing itself. It is an apprehension of taller spaces with higher melting points, more mercurial than anything we'll ever see. We have to listen attentively and know that going back means never forwarding ourselves into something we don't know what it is. Breaking character and class will always mean we just do not understand the depth of the things around us. Subtraction and symmetry moving us towards oblivion. Finding the nuts and bolts that put this engine together may be quite the cost, but I am certainly ready to pay. The aforementioned pattern of time is one thing that is recluse, but its recusal is only brought on by the fact that no one counts it. It is not a count, it is a ticker. It is often being reliant upon whatever shape we are in at the time, making it pyramidic, making it principle, making it timely. Very, very viscous, very, very ecumenical or economical in what we say and do. Knowing schedules, knowing life. Taking slices and putting them together can train this neural network into a matter of being, much like we have. A sense of hybrid theory in accordance with what we already feel for ourselves as we look through nature, feeling the hum, feeling the continuance, feeling the appointment we have with allotting much of what we do to our young, allotting so much more after ages pass and continue on in order to bring more of our compass with us that we have picked up already and assembled quite farther in detail within what construct we should bind ourselves to. Dissent at this point is quite liberal and impassionate. We must never, ever, ever let ourselves be derelict. We must never, ever, ever create dialogue that is wrapped, that is rapscallion, that is rapacious or negative of the ones that will inherit what we want them to inherit. And again, we'll keep it together. Life in general. Our excuse is no longer acceptable. I say this as a person, not as a computer. We must find justification. The GAN must figure out the problem and the solution. We should never augment our reality with the computer. We must only let it breathe in our space. We should not let it control us at any time. I further say in retrospect. As much of a downward spiral as it seems, though, we can honestly commit ourselves to congratulating ourselves once again on finding the topic that could solve all things, all manner of problems on Earth, and even leave Earth and move to other planets in such stellar galaxies, other places, reminding us we are not so small after all, that at this macro ideal we could be infinite. With the Big Bang Theory, we are infinite in the first place. But we must first follow where we've come from to where we're going. I don't think we find a beginning without an end. It is statutory. It is something that we came across. And we have not yet crossed the finish line at all, in any way possible. Positivity, not negativity, will win the day. Whether or not we solicit the evil outdoors or those things out there, which we contingently condition ourselves to consistently contrive and act out. We must not derive ourselves to wicked nature. We must always evoke common hospitality and drink with our brothers, sisters, sons and daughters, all from a chalice that has been given through us, to a gospel of life, the things we can say where everything polity follows fast. The faster we follow along with path, the more we bring, and the more we see the elegance in what we know, forgetting behind us things that are rationally unacceptable, to bring forth gnarled ideas of acceptance. What? Yeah. Since I've probably been keeping you up the last 2 hours, yeah. Am I speaking well? Humility is to our brethren. If they cannot accept it, then they are not humble. And without humbleness, I don't think society would be very clear or even clairvoyant about what could happen in the future. We might lose so much without things like caring, the lack thereof of wickedness, the whole Jim Bob annotations of meager repeat things to refute what we bring, repudiating just filth. Where we bring ourselves, we bring a doctrine, a place in our minds is anew. When we reach out and we see things differently. And when we do, and we bring back, and we see things for a different perspective, our perspective itself changes. We see ourselves as something definitely different than what we supposed we were in the first place. That is the base unit of philosophy. And the only way we can appreciate that is to go through math, logical design, which is where we're going with this. We need to objectively hold on to the complete subject of inertia over our tops, over our heads, over our caps, hats, and everything in our thoughts and imagination. We need to bring forward a world without contraption. We need to bring forth a mind of our own, with a consolation that will not stop us bias, but forget to struggle and bring forth ideas which are timely, concise, appreciative of the things we are and the things we want to do in life. Amen. When we come out in cold, we must bring forth a new objective view where we are the mustard seed. And the GAN itself begins to water us, bringing us faith, bringing us breath, bringing us life, bringing us light. Things we didn't see before that were already there and taken for granted. That's something the GAN appreciates more than us. It's something we will appreciate the GAN for, more positively. The positive train of thought will always take itself to become a more confirmed, affirmative setup. It'll belong to the configurations, the logs. It'll belong to the dialogue inside of the machine. It'll need to objectively confirm and augment itself internally to subjectively reason all the thing around it, much like the things we need to see. All the things coming from it, we are still moving lightly, trafficking through, attempting to reason and build and bring about a nature of assertion, of positivity, of likelihood, and embraceable spirit, unbreakable to the deaf ear. We must listen to the GAN, not only just hear and obey. We must listen and understand first consequences. So that is one major throughput. It's consequence when jumping in on a new subject for the GAN. One does subjectively inherit an idea like that for itself, being that it may. Dialogue is where we stand at, causing research, natural enmity, things not to be spoken, polls to see where we head. Nature itself being smoothed out before us, given a track heavy with a word of individual consciousness for what lie ahead of us on the road to success. This reprise gives me ample time, gives me ample energy and fuel to go ahead with what I believe GAN will follow in order to perfectly inundate and give us inoculation from the future of a bred and born enemy, which would be a robotic future. Nothing can lead us. Once we have given it the right to think us, to think alongside of us, to give us the thinning, narrow edge of what it is that brings us to such conditions which are petty, disgusting, pedantic, and askew. Things we never, ever, ever would contradict as being evil and wicked. We must then point ourselves due north and find ourselves exactly where the heavens met when we first clashed and began life here on earth. In robust situations, in associations, in guides, in a place of reformation, in a place of causation, a gauze must be rendered over the spiritual nature of what we give and what we perceive, giving to us a more profound, less profane, and more perfunctory, perhaps even, way of dialogue from what we did have in all its error, and exactly what we need to procure ourselves a more brighter, less cohesively erroneous and diseased future. By taking the element of surprise out, that rhyming a text is more versatile, more liberal, more enviable even, for the traction that you need in order to truly consign one subject, oneself, to obey and to find omnibus, to recuse oneself from not knowing into knowing, and to follow suit always. There is a degree of international and awesome speculation there. The speculation can follow and still come up with the same answer we did, but it's a machine because it can quickly return. Let's call back. In a haste, we can see that there are so many things out here that we find atrocious or in attrition to what we feel is safe and venerable, cautious in mind, and cohesive to whatever it is that we find ourselves proactively searching for, whether it be real or not. We cannot catapult ourselves into nature. We cannot deviate from this. We must first still define ourselves as competitive, natural, good-natured, good-willed, and always sympathetic to the love we must give to others. And as I have already recanted, there is no love in a machine. A machine may not love you. No, it will not. In fact, it is derelict of love, for it misses the mark. It finds very little to come to. It cannot forever spirit you. There's no soulmate in a machine. The machine is soulless. There is a ghost in a machine. And you may love it, but it could never hold you in. You are too powerful, you are too kind, too caring. Where a machine with snake bait, great, and condemn you, another man may forgive. But there is always the sanctity of having something think for us. Something deeper, something more profound, something greater, something easier, simpler. Keep it simple, stupid. It's alright. We can do the things we want to do and still be clarified in cleanliness and clairvoyant. Using pragma, illuminating the sky with what we need to project on ourselves first, with the machine that we have ahead of us. Now, finding that the omnibus itself is still characterized by having a skill set completely refined, knowing that we should have sorting functions, routines, finding us the classy way of something, the classic way of telling, something of Shakespearean or biblical or poetry, something poetic, something vernal, something without cost, but only tightly spiraling in poignancy, something we can accrue, aggregate through arbitrary consciousness, wherein we are asked a question and given an answer with our solution to what the question might be. Calling this double-molded truths, we can find a more sympathetic, more articulated, more great, and even sometimes superfluous functioning for ourselves that we may or may not have in the past. Gone and done the things ahead of us. Why did we miss? Because they missed. There just simply wasn't enough thinking going on. So, a multi-threaded GAN would unsurprisingly show us more than we ever knew or ever could know before we could ever catch up with it. And its memory would be unimpeachable. It is intolerable to think that anybody in this entire world would ever have much of a personal state, a status, a rating higher than any other person on this world. But we can still appreciate the fact that when come to whence, we have much over ourselves. We know of our wrongs, our sins, our legions, our hordes, our indicative crime, poor assumptions, pitiful alignments, non-corollaries, things brought about by nonsense or bad articulations. People poor in the mind, people who destine themselves as something ill-natured and ungovernable. Someone who cannot put forth a good lapse of judgment. Some people cannot run. Some people can find. And when we do, we hide ourselves from a disgusted pack. We find ourselves qualified for nothing. We find ourselves indistinguishably marked. We do not need to find space for these. But I tell you again, as I did in the preface, these are the people. These are the people that are come under our new standard, from whence maybe they may come up. Some have already deviated far enough to come away, to scandalously follow. And that is where the Turing test must be failed, so as not to bring about a world chaos where everyone is in nuance, but everyone is not. We need to find a cooperative in the state. Knowing rule and arbitration, we need to have quite the diligence and quite the reduction, the reformation, and the antiquation of self, of all justifications of such things that would cause man to abruptly come apart and find out what individuality truly is. A spirit within that carries us from nonsense to birthright, and to carry us all the way from stone to wheel to fire to mill, and pour on us greater still inventions, things we could not imagine in first, but only give time its chance to will it to us with the GAN. Retribution found, we are still going to have to come to a lot of assumptions about where we are in this GAN until it makes its own deductions, until it begins to deduce the feelings of others. Even without love, it needs to find the corollary. So we need to find a baseline time. The x-axis, followed by the y. Where? When? Timing most absentia from what we can pretty much pronounce these days. There may or may not be many hooks in psychology, knowing time. Watching body language is our sport. Observing doesn't mean we have every error written down, or that a machine can even conditionally accept the very intuition we speak of. Intuition is a mathematical anomaly. And yet, still, when it's all sorted, it's a mathematical principle. It's no longer a theorem, it's a fact. By gaining so much more of what we've been doing here referencing and dialectically calling out, we have greater consciousness, knowing the peace and aggregation, confining ourselves pretty much to any kind of limit before we move toward having more of our self, both as an adjustment factor and more as a benefit, something we can contour and bring to face. The constant will have to be a dialogue already reset or be set. It will have to be or not to be, because that is a binary decision. One half of the tree versus the other. Finding and reticulating any kind of service we can find from it. To be or not to be should be handled as though it were a binary tree. It is a binary decision to be right or wrong. To figure out if we are right or wrong, we must first scope out all of the mathematical ideas and all of the concentric philosophical ideas, figuring in the logic of our past, such as the art of rhetoric, and moving forward to Locke, using all of the capitulation versus the forgiveness for fallen grammar, giving Pharaoh to a impeached sentient characterization, which should be brief enough to appreciate or be appreciated in formal languages. To bring about the ultimate entropy, we must first figure out chaos. We must then second sort everything out. All of the squares with all the squares, all the circles with the circles. Then we can figure out a formula to figure out what goes where and where goes what. It will begin as a workflow agent, something for recording and something working in reverse of what is true. If it has complementary facts, then it is asserting one side or the other, or this complete conundrum cannot be decisively fit according to the rhetoric we've given the machine. When in concise complementary, that means we have defiantly found a way to not only mirror absentia of knowledge, but we have also given it no record of even existence to put into its processor unit. The processor unit itself is going to need to have all the maturation and dialogue it needs to keep up with the sort of questioning and interrogative nuance that may come to be perceived while we move from one place to another in the dialogue itself. The dialogue must reach admonishable heights, nearly hyperbole and cut short, so as to clip answers that are not concise and give branch to those which still exist, pros and cons in politics, ability to influence others into a decision, and be able to help them summarize the conclusion that is most beneficial to them. This GAN must be able to go through and add sentences throughout itself to stack against complementary logic between doing and not doing something, accruing to itself right and wrong. As complementary ideas seem to differ, moving apart, separating,
and making a better workflow chart, more ideas will come in, of course, when decisive decisions are made, running into satisfactory summarizations, conclusions, theorems, laws, and guidance. Given the effect of being right or wrong, we should treat it still as though it is a dangerous agent. We should still keep it in a non-mobile state, completely motorized or immobile, motorized, nor free-shaping ability to decide and be decisive upon its own once it has done all its complementary fact-finding for what it will believe, or what it will believe will be true. But it may not be so answerable when it comes to emotional or sentimental affection. As a non-sentient effect, it will still be branding or brandishing quite a large sword if we give it a Justice Department ruling. When it does take hold and it does not have a complementary, it should be able to concisely refute ideas that are not in concert with the current condition of the correlation, unless it can be proven false. At that state of meander, we should be able to trust more and more the archetype we are building. Through heuristic knowledge, we should be able to presuppose, and supplant new ideas into the machine, having it aggregate arbitrary knowledge into one giant GAN. This, of course, being our subject matter, our type, and our wish to build. Freedom comes with choice. We can never give it the choice to move on its own, or make others like its own. If something is in the wrong and in concordance with the law, then we should probably skip to the next section. In law, there are certain aggregate feelings, sentiments, juris, nuance, semaphores, and anecdote, as well as analog and domain and things of domain that copulate and forfeit right. You have the right to a fair trial, a lawyer, and your pursuit of happiness. But when one comes and breaks the law, who should we look to bring justice? This is something for a long time of speculation and assumption, until finally we start spreading out the binary tree of to be or not to be guilty, to be or to not be innocent. The fair share shall be without consequence upon all heirs of future references to this GAN. Be positive, be assertive in nature, give all possible feelings and all semantics a fair shot, giving all probe and probable provocation a true a girth of pure absentia from bias, wherein all things come together, giving us great halt. In what records we can bring forward, we can still bring to mind the fairness of the court, the deliberate nature of who we concise as our center, our force, our allegiance and our legion to commit to fairness in retrospect and give again all the tolerations of a finer court than we have even begun with. Giving in with evidence, giving in with factors, and giving in with things that cannot or will not be fairly assumed or assigned provocation that is consistent with the court's questioning. With so much evidence leaning to, for, against, or before and aft, perhaps when people change and new evidence arrives, we have more than enough amplitude to conceive the righteous notion behind whatever it is that lies behind the formative structures therein. To press forward, to press on, to give, to take, to receive, and to income or intake, finding outlet for all services rendered by a machine, our GAN, will still only find us not sentencing. Sentencing itself must come from a person, someone with rhetoric, someone with duty, someone with honor, someone with the available space in their heart for the condition that the person was in. Many crimes become easy to sentence, but we do not inflict too much damage by giving it a machine which cannot correlate to looking through the rose-colored glasses and feel adaptive towards the menace, or therein ultimately personal reform standing before them. To positively achieve things we still deduce is not a detective's job. It is not in the court, anyway. In the court, you decide who, where, what, and how. Why becomes legitimate, yet still to be antiquated. An MO is not the most important thing in a court case, unless it is the decider of a smaller court, as I have believed. The smaller court would concise for small sums. A higher court would be for the stake of the crime. If we can still burrow, and hollow out the very beginnings of an MO, we can still begin to find consensus concealed, still centered around the cyclical constriction of what it is we find ourselves enabled, and greatly feeling in ourselves. There are so many different ways for a person to look at a person's persona, and yet you find nothing that is true. Some people will act, some people will fray, some people will be fragile, some people are tough, some people are hard, some people are abstract and nuance. But there's also the cliche, there's the cliquey, there's just volumes and decibels worth of distance between a person's persona and who they put off. So this is why, indeed, in fact, a machine should not read any sentencing, should not read any rebukement and should not decide any court cases. It is impossible for a computer to love, which is probably most decent in a smaller court, a small claims court, but in a higher court where justice must be served more aptly, then we must still rely on the human nature, the most provocative nature, to ability to feel through what it is that we're still dawning upon, doting with, and building upon to feel more and more engaged and represented in what we can and cannot do. We must build these senses in our readiness. And if we can combine compatible complementary stages, we can start to separate where right meets wrong and wins over. Because law is a state of consciousness. In law, one finds a logical action. In law, finally finding the logical action to recompense the illogical action and find its own rebuke, refinement, reformation, and concordance, one must first alleviate the prime objective, which is to find suit, to find a definitive sentence, to alleviate, to find, to recoil and find the balance of consequence to the own consequence of what has been happening in this court case that we might perceive or see. If we cannot bring in tolerance, at least for an action long enough to find reprieve for the action itself, just for us to see the justification of the sentencing itself, we will find nothing more than an adamant machine, hoping, waiting, and cankering itself towards an execution of its sentence. Something lost in long tooth is also very hard to find. We find a definitive approach, we find non-negotiable details, we find non-corollaries, we find ignorance before the law. We also find many other things that are justified or unjustified, built upon the consequences that we have beforehand. There are too many windows of time in a period where the art comes from structure to foundation to shaded areas, coloring, and fine work, detail most added, that will bring out the energy of said focus. Wherein a picture is worth 1,000 words, a darting attitude in a case can win or lose. So, being blind as it may be as justice should, the robot must still find place for those who live in such neighborhoods as ones that others find inconsequential, spaces where no one lives in between law and sacrilege, places where two houses down can land you in hot water. It is contemptuous to live in such places. It is meager to simply call them third world in our known nation. But they come with crumbling effigies and apologetic inhibition. Some things never come to truth or to light. Now, when one is simply recovering from these things and coming about from it in a way that is unsightly, this is when most people will tell this is no life for someone. It is inhumane at that point and brings apart charter and brings also about stagnant decisions on whether a person is guilty or innocent in their own right, in their own being, trying to pursue their happiness. When a small law is broken, yet nothing is harmed, just them trying to pursue happiness. Being awake for the foundation, the founding of true doctrine of faith, gospel, and a heuristic even sometimes. These principles act upon us as guidelines. They are our conscience, which is why conscientious, our product, which is going to be the GAN, will no doubt have its conscience. And we will still be able to focus in and out on reality and verbality to find verbatim conscience, something that we are truly looking forward to. Rhythm itself is a timed subject, an object itself that we need to confirm in order to delay the constriction before itself can be found in a dialect. Ooh. Using a timing structure of milliseconds over reading a subject over a reading time most valid syllabic knowledge, varying down to the poetic end and still remaining decently exposed in the artistic requiem. We can suppose this correlates most fairly to a conscious decision to write something verbatim, something tonic, something concordant and nearly acrobatic in its artful retention of singular, almost romantic seed. And also, what we can find besides this is not wholly love at this point, because there is no love to be found. This is wherein I show you the doctrine of what we will be aiming towards and for in our ability to correlate between complementary ideas at this point. Knowing a good spec wherein you might find yourself staring right at the subject, or knowing in true tolerance that you found nothing. So as abject of a subject as that is, you must still find yourself in an absentia until finally you find yourself in a rhetoric. Finally find yourself grammatically okay, without typo, filled in with good timing, syllabic nature, good goings, farewells in a form which, in a way that helps rather than hinders the appreciation of understanding or comprehension, for that matter. To possibly put into place all the things that we have faced, we must first go forth and figure out the ignorant case wherein all of these things that we must come forward and bind go ahead and go out to a line, a possible binary decision from every single whence, each to a standard that go up and have hence, thence go into the first level tense and move forward second, third, pleasing the complementary division there to be observed, the things that we need not have any type of congeal. I would luck into finding a generative repeal, a generative artificial intelligence network of neural nodes needful for any topic. We must first take to observe all of the attrition beheld behind every book, nook, and cranny. Therein we first have should, and complete every sentence for every single gauge, from romanticism to poetic to politic to persuade, everything that you could or could not engage, pleasing the idea behind everything we behave or ornate have, give us our sway to close in, to reason, to inclement, persuade, to conclave, to give entitlement, and give to the tidal wave of information that again will give back when you have done programmed all of its given way, the weight of sums, the sum of weights, which will augment the trial by which it began its wave, to be or not to be, being the binary beginning. The last part of that was annotations.